also known as EIA, is a process of evaluating the fundamental environmental impacts of a proposed project or development, taking into account the interrelated socio-economic, cultural, and human health impacts, both beneficial and adverse. The EIA process ensures sustainable socio-economic development to both human and environmental well-being. It focuses on the likelihood that effects of proposed socio-economic development have on both the environment and people, then design measures that can be taken to reduce or avoid those effects. Sadly, this well-meaning process is often misunderstood and criticized as a delaying factor or a prevention of socio-economic development. Loyiso Mkwana, the Gauteng Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, GDOD, Chief Director, Sustainable Use of the Environment, explains from where and how GDOD derives its mandate to manage the EIA process in Gauteng Province.
The mandate of the department is derived from the Constitution, the highest law in the Republic. Indeed, the Constitution is quite clear. It grants an environmental right to each and every citizen of the country, in that everyone has a right to environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. The Constitution then further narrates that the state must take measures to prevent degradation, to promote sustainable development, and it is from this broad mandate that the department achieves or derives its mandate. The NEMA Act does then clarify the roles and responsibilities and the framework that the minister, as a Minister of Environment, has got the overall role. However, the Constitution in terms of Section 156 is quite clear that environment is a concurrent responsibility. Therefore, the MEC, it becomes then also a competent authority in terms of environmental management. When we look at a development application, we will look into the social aspects in terms of what does this project seek to do in terms of the human and social needs of the province. For example, if it's a hospital, we know it's a social infrastructure. If it's a housing settlement, again, it's a social infrastructure. If it's a road or, for example, airport, we know it's an economic infrastructure. So we then locate the decision-making within those strategic plans and priorities of the province.
The department has the following policies and guidelines: the Gauteng Open Space Policy, your buffer zones guidelines, RAID data policy, Regis policy, your conservation plan version 3, filling stations guidelines, your GDOD requirements for biodiversity assessments, Gauteng Agricultural Potential Atlas version 4, sustainability guidelines. These are guidelines that inform the decision-making process and needs to be considered during an EIA, an Environmental Impact Assessment application process.
The GDOD EIA Administration Office is open from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. during the week. This ensures the EIA process is impartial and transparent. Every developer is required to appoint an environmental consultant to represent them during the EIA application process.
There's always somebody manning the front desk. When such an application is received, they give to us the application form together with the supporting documents, and we also, on the other hand, provide whoever is submitting an application with an acknowledgement, but that acknowledgement is in the form of a date stamp to confirm that the matter was received by the department.
We check the information about the environmental assessment practitioner, the information about the applicant, the information about the landowner. If all the information is correct, then we move on checking if the number of applications have been provided. Then at last we check if the correct signatures are attached on the application. If the application does not meet the requirements, we refer the application back to the environmental assessment practitioner for amendments. If the application meets all the requirements, then the application will be accepted and acknowledged then afterwards referred to the environmental components who will conduct the EIA review process.
Once the file is stamped, it then goes through a review process. The file is handed over from one officer to the next, up to the head of department.
When I receive the projects, I first look at the application form and check if they've correctly applied for the activities according to the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2014. And then after checking the activities applied for, then I check our geographical information system, which I look at our conservation plan to look at the sensitivities that are relevant to the project. And when I've looked at the sensitivities in our GIS conservation plan, then I look at the reports if they have mentioned any of those sensitivities in the reports. And then after looking at the sensitivities, I then look at the mitigation measures that they've put in the report. I then look at their layout plan and the sensitivity map, if it's in line according to what I have checked in our conservation plan. Then I check that they've complied with the public participation process, which is Chapter 6 in the regulations, EIA Regulations 2014, and look at they have included the attachments that go with the public participation process, which is the site notice. Is the site notice visible and also legible, and also the newspaper article that they've advertised for the project, and also the comments and response from the interested and affected parties and how they've responded to the comments that were provided by interested and affected parties. And also look at, have they consulted other stakeholders, for example, local authorities for the projects, and is it in line with the Gauteng EMF environmental management framework? And then I check the environmental management program. Does it look at the sensitivities that the environment of that project site? Do they mention how they're going to mitigate the impacts that are associated with the project? I will then go to my supervisor to hand it over for site inspection and also giving recommendations.
I'll need to look at the size of the site, what are the issues on site, have they conducted the relevant studies, who conducted the studies. The studies conducted, we need to check if whether they in line with our departmental guidelines, and look at the site inspection report after we've conducted the site inspection to see if whether the information that they've provided in the report, does it correlate with what is on site. I see Protea Kafra woodland around, I can see a stream on this side, good pristine grassland on the ground. So already I have an idea that what is contained in the report is really a good reflection of what is happening on the ground. What needs to happen from here is just contain the site inspection report, have a look at the report itself, as well as our decision support tool, and therefore one will then apply his mind, make recommendations to the supervisor to take it forward.
You might want to have another layer of management wherein you might want to ascertain whether or not there's been stringent or lenient application of those guidelines, and in that tier or level, that is where I would come in to say that yes, the application is in line with such guidelines, or you've been very lenient in the application of the guidelines, in some instances very stringent. We also bear in mind that we at this level review such applications against government priorities in the province. Sustainable human settlement would also come into being. So at my level, those are some of the instances that you might want to check in when you review the application against what they have done levels below me.
What I'm going to do as a director in charge of EIAs, I'm going to check if this application, when they review this application, is it in line with the Gauteng development framework? Is it in line with the Gauteng Environmental Management Framework? The policies that they've included in the recommendations, are they in line with all these policies? In terms of the EIA regulation, I need also to check whether this application, does it meet the minimum requirements of public participation process? Because if indeed we don't check all those things, it can lead to the issue of appeals. That's why I need to check holistically in terms of the EIA process, whether all policies are included in this application. I've satisfied myself, most of the policies are adhered to. Now I'm going to road this file to the Chief Director for further quality control.
Our approach to these matters is sustainable development. So we look into, is this development helping us to address social challenges within the province? Is it in line with the economic plan of the province? But importantly, is it also addressing environmental protection? At that level, then the application will then go to the Deputy Director General, Natural Resources Management, Advocate Nesidoni, and then if he's happy with the recommendation, then it will go to the HOD, who herself applies her mind, and then if she supports and she's okay, then she will then sign and grant or refuse the decision. In the 2015 State of Address, the Premier of the province directed the MEC and the department to streamline the administrative process involved in granting the development rights. In this regard, the Premier indicated that we need to reduce the regulated time frame. In fact, we must issue decisions within 90 days. I must clarify that indeed what that means is that instead of issuing decisions within the regulated framework of 107 days in terms of the 2014 Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, we will now issue the environmental authorizations within 90 days. In fact, by the end of March 2016, which is the end of the financial year from that State of Province address, we've issued about 96% of all EIA applications within 90 days, and we've issued around about 98.2% of all EIA applications within the regulated time frame of 107 days. Further, the Premier, encouraged by the realization of this objective, has now set us even a more challenge in terms of a stretch goal that says, can we in fact work towards a plan to reduce that processing time from the 90 days to the 30 days. And we are indeed working over a 2-year program to achieve the premier objective, to indeed reduce regulatory framework, cut red tape, and make Gauteng a destination, investment destination of choice.
Large-scale local and foreign business people undertaking investment projects valued at 5 million rand upwards can submit their EIA application at the Stanton-based Gauteng Investment Center, a one-stop processing center where the process is much faster.
The investors are both domestic and foreign, and the minimum requirement is that an investor invests 5 million in the province. The differences are that in this office, the time frames for responding to EIA applications is reduced. The difference also with us being here is that even at the point where an investor had not even bought the land, they have access to our geographic information system, wherein we can advise them on whether the land that they are proposing to start an investment on is suitable for investment or not. So that means they don't have to go and buy a piece of land that in the end they will not be able to use, and that service is provided free of charge.
The application received here is an application for residential development. When we start looking at the spatial layers, the GIS layers, The GIS layers tell us what is on the site. So for example, on this site, it is an EMF zone 3. The policy around EMF zone 3 is that we would not like to have residential developments in zone 3. So it gives an idea as to what type of developments we want to approve in zone 3. That's what the GIS is there for.
Indeed, the fast tracking of environmental impact assessment process does not compromise the quality of the work.
It is important to locate the Premier's objectives within the context of the global effort to reduce regulatory burden. Canada in 2012 recently reviewed their environmental legislation and provided for a streamlined process that addresses the challenge of regulatory burden. So it's not just a Gauteng issue, it's a global perspective that we need to collectively reduce whilst we are ensuring environmental quality processes and decision making. We need to reduce the administrative side of processing on these matters.